Well, today we're going to read the book of Esther, because today it's really what we're doing. We're taking a break from Hebrews. Okay, Hebrews has been a great book, but sometimes when you're studying, you just need to take a break. So today we're going to take a break. We're at the halfway point in Hebrews, so we're going to do something moderately entertaining and very informative, and actually something that's right along the lines of what Jewish synagogues are doing this weekend, this very weekend, and even today. They're reading the book of Esther because this weekend is the celebration of Purim. And it's one of the... If you could take Mardi Gras and put it into a Jewish synagogue context, that's what Purim is. They wear costumes, they celebrate, they make noise. So this morning we're going to do some of that. None of you came in costumes. I'm really bummed, but we can fix some of the other stuff. But Esther is meant to be read out loud. So we're going to read the whole book this morning, and you're going to participate with me, okay? It's going to be an easy thing to do. There's a good guy and a bad guy in the story, and a wonderful woman. But it turns out that traditionally all we do is... So when the bad guy's name comes up, you want to drown out the hearing of his name because he is so bad. I mean, you just want to drown him out. If you go to a synagogue today... What they'll do is they'll read this out loud, and they'll have noisemakers. They have these big clacker noisemakers. You just twist them around like this. And every time this guy's name comes up, you want to drown out his name. So we're going to do that today. His name is Haman. Okay? So every time I say Haman, boo. Excellent. Or if you have something else you can make noise with, stomp your feet, boo, whatever you want to do. Hit the person next to you so they squeal, something like that. Just make noise. Haman's the bad guy. Now the good guy is a guy by the name of Mordecai. And Mordecai is a wonderful guy in this. Every time you hear Mordecai, don't drown out his name, but make a noise that says, yeah, ooh, ooh. Okay, don't drown him out. We want to hear his name, okay? But he's a good guy, all right? And that's how we're going to do it this morning. You can listen for the bad guy when I say Haman. Excellent. And when I say Mordecai, oh, yeah. Oh, excellent. That's great. You got it down. And we're going to do the whole thing. Now, I mentioned last week that this has a connection to present-day history, to right now. There is a gentleman who lives in Persia right now in power, a guy by the name of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. And Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, he is avowed that he is going to destroy Israel. This is the leader of present-day Persia, which is now called Iran. Iran was called Persia up until the 30s, the 1930s. But this man, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, has said that I'm going to destroy all of Israel so all the Jews are eradicated. And since that's the little Satan, I need to take out the greater Satan as well, which is America. Mahmoud Ahmadinejad has vowed.
Say that name slow.
Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. It's a big name. Well, he has vowed to do that, and the only way he can do that as a small nation is if he gets nuclear weapons. And hence, that's why in the newspapers every day, virtually, when you read in the newspapers, why is everyone so concerned about Mahmoud Ahmadinejad getting nuclear weapons? It's because as soon as he gets them, he wants to carry out his threat to wipe out Israel and the United States. Now, I'm not giving you secondhand information. This is real. He has said this in public. And you say, well, he would never do that because we would retaliate with nuclear weapons and wipe him out. They don't care because what you probably don't know is Mahmoud Ahmadinejad is part of an Islamic sect that says that they exist to bring chaos to the world so that the Islamic Messiah, the Mahdi, the 12th Imam, will come back and rescue them even if the bad guys drop nukes on Iran. It's like a suicide pact as a nation. And they're convinced that when they do this, the Mahdi will come back at the last minute and save everybody, and the whole world will then become Islamic because they'll understand it. So he's doing this to bring back the Messiah. I'm not telling you anything he hasn't said in public and at the United Nations. This guy is very much like Haman. Okay, are you ready? I printed it out here because it's bigger print for me. I'm also going to, if you're going to follow along with this, I'm going to use the Hebrew pronunciation for the king's name in this story. The king in this is Ahasuerus. Ahasuerus. That was 5 syllables. I can't do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use what his name is transliterated from Hebrew, and it's Ahashverosh. 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 Well, that's only 4 syllables, so that's okay, okay? Achashverosh, okay? So that's how it's going to go. Are you ready? Okay, first I'm going to give you a little roadmap. Hadassah is the name of our hero, but she's going to be renamed in this story Esther, so just so you don't get too confused about that. And to help you follow how we're going to be doing the reading, this is kind of the emotional roller coaster that this story is going to take us on. It starts with a high and it plummets to a horrible low, and it finally makes its way back to the end, and everything's happy. And so here's the chapters. We're going to click them off as we go along so you can find out what our progress is as we go through the 10 chapters of Esther. And it's going to get to its worst after chapter 4 and around chapter 5 and then come back up again. That's just so that when we get down to the depths of despair in chapter 5, you don't just totally zone out and go, this is a really depressing story. Because it's got a good ending, okay? So we're going to click this off as we go. So our scene where this picks up is Susa in Persia. Here's a night scene from the movie that came out about, I think it was 2006, called A Night with the King. It's a Christian production. It's a movie about the story of Esther. And so this is the nighttime scene of Susa in Persia, which is present-day Iran, okay? And so here we go. We're going to start off with chapter 1 of the incredible book of Esther. Keep on your toes. Mordecai's good, Haman's bad. Ready? Here we go. Chapter 1, verse 1. Now it took place in the days of Ahasuerus. Are you ready for that? It's going to, those of you in the front row, pardon me, okay? It took place in the days of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces. Whoa! I'll also throw in a few of those because I can't believe it. In those days of King Ahasuerus, it turns out he sat on his royal throne, which was at the citadel of Susa. In the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet to all of his princes and to all of his attendants, the army officers, both in Persia and in Media, the nobles and the princes and his provinces being in his presence. Big deal. And he displayed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor of his great majesty for many days. In fact, 180 days, which is 6 months. Thank you. Okay, verse 5. Now when the days were completed, the end of the 6 months, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days for all the people who were present at the citadel of Susa, from the greatest to the least, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. Oh, there were hangings of fine white and violet linen held by cords of fine purple linen on silver rings, and marble columns and couches of gold and silver. Yeah, couches of gold and silver. And of mosaic pavements of porphyry, and also made of marble and mother of pearl and precious stones. Drinks were served in golden vessels. Woohoo! I added that too. In golden vessels of various kinds, and the royal wine was plentiful according to the king's bounty. Oh, just plentiful. The drinking was done according to the law. Don't worry. And there was no compulsion, for so the king had given orders to each official in his household that he should do according to the desires of each person, whatever they want. Give it to him. Now, Queen Vashti, the king's wife, Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the palace which belonged to King Ahasuerus. Now, on the 7th day of the banquet, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehumam, Bisra, Marbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass, the 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown in order to display her beauty to the people and the princes, for she was beautiful. Got the picture now? She's coming from the women's feast into the men's feast. Some people think naked. Anyway, we're not going to go there. But Queen Vashti refused. She refused to come to the king's command delivered by the eunuchs, and then the king became very, very angry with her, and his wrath burned within him. Then the king said to the wise men around him who understood the times, for it was the custom of the king so to speak before all those who knew law and justice, to ask them, and those who were close to him. So Karshina and Shethar and Admatha and Tarshish and Meres, Marsina and Memucan, the 7 princes of the Persian and Media Empire who had access to the king's presence and sat in the first place in the kingdom, he said, okay, according to law, what is to be done with Queen Vashti? Because she did not obey the command of King Ahasuerus. Oops, I said it wrong. Ahasuerus. She did not obey me. That was delivered by the eunuchs. In the presence of the king and in the presence of the princes, Memucan, one of the princes, said, Well, Queen Vashti has wronged not only the king, but also the princes, well, and all the peoples who are in the provinces of the king. For the queen's conduct will become known to all the women, causing them to look with contempt on their husbands by saying, well, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought into his presence, but she did not come. So this day, the ladies of Persia and Media who have heard of the queen's conduct will speak in the same way to all the king's princes, and there will be plenty of contempt and anger. So, if it pleases the king, let a royal edict be issued by him. Let it be written on the laws of Persia and all of Media so that it cannot be repealed, that Vashti may no longer come into the presence of Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal position to another who is more worthy than she. And when the king's edict, which will be made heard throughout the entire kingdom, great as it is, then all the women will give honor to their husbands, great and small. Well, so this word pleased the king and the princes, and the king did as Memucan had proposed. So he sent letters to all the king's provinces, to each province according to its script, to each province according to its people, to each province according to their language, that every man should be the master in his own house, and the one who speaks in the language of his own people is king. Chapter 2. Well, after these things, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had subsided, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. And then the king's attendants who served him said, Let beautiful young virgins be brought before the king. And let the king appoint overseers in all the provinces of his kingdom, and they may gather every beautiful young virgin to the citadel of Susa, to the harem, into the custody of Hegai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women. And don't forget, let their cosmetics be given to them as well. Woo-hoo. And then let the young lady who pleases the king, she can be queen in place of Vashti. Well, of course, the matter pleased the king. He said, do it now. Verse 5, so now there was in the citadel of Susa a Jew whose name was Mordecai. We'll work on that. He's the son of Yair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. Now a little PS right there. That should ring a bell to you. Not Yair, but the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, the son of Benjamite. Do you remember way back when we studied David last year, there was this guy when David was being run out of town by his son, this guy who went up on the hillside and cursed at David as he left and threw rocks at him? And David's mighty men said, should I go up there and lop his head off? And David said, no, maybe he's speaking for God in some kind of way. And the guy continued to scream threats and anger and throw rocks at the king as he's leaving town. You know what that guy's name was? Shimei. This Shimei. Interesting. Had David taken out Shimei in anger, back in, I think that's 2 Samuel 15 or 16, if he had taken out Shimei, we may never have had a Mordecai. Interesting. Well, anyway, that's just a little PS. You didn't pay for that. So here we go. There was a man by the name of Mordecai. Yes, who had been taken into exile from Jerusalem with the captives who had been exiled with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had exiled. So he's one of the ones that Nebuchadnezzar took out of the country and brought to this land. Well, this man was bringing up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had no father or mother. Now the young lady was beautiful in form and in face. And when her father and her mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. What a nice guy. So it came about when the command and the decree of the king were heard, and many young ladies were gathered to the citadel of Susa under the custody of Hegai, that Esther was taken to the king's palace into the custody of Hegai, who was in charge of the women. Now, the young lady pleased him, this eunuch, pleased him very much, and she found favor with him. So he quickly provided her with her cosmetics, and with food, and gave her 7 choice maids from the king's palace, and transferred her with her maids to the best place in the harem. Esther did not make known her people or her kindred, that she's a Jew, for Mordecai had instructed her that she should not make these things known, who she was. And every day, Mordecai, what a nice guy, he walked back and forth in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and how she fared. Now, when the turn of each young lady came in, when the turn of each young lady came to go in to King Ahasuerus, after the end of her 12 months, under the regulations of the women, for the days of beautification were like this: 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with spices and cosmetics. Anyway, the young lady would go into the king in this way, and anything that she desired was given to her to take with her from the harem into the king's palace when she would go in. In the evening, she would go in, and in the morning, she would return to the second harem to the custody of Shaashgaz, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She would not go in again into the king unless the king delighted so much in her and she was summoned back to him. Now, when the turn of Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had been taken as his daughter, when she came in to go to the king, she did not request anything except what Hegai, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the women, had advised. And so Esther found favor in the eyes of all who saw her. So Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus to the royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. And you know, the king loved Esther. He loved her more than all the women, and she found favor and kindness with him more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head, and made her queen instead of Vashti. When the king gave a great banquet, Esther's banquet, for all his princes and all his servants, he also made a holiday for the provinces and gave gifts according to the king's bounty. Woohoo! Esther is queen. I added that. Now, when the virgins were gathered together the second time, then Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, and Esther had not yet made known her kindred, that is, that she's a Jew, or her people, even as Mordecai had commanded her. For Esther did what Mordecai told her. She did what he told her. And she had done everything because she was under his care. We should stop the story right here. Verse 21, in those days when Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's officials from those who guarded the door, became angry, and they sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. They're going to kill him. But the plot became known to Mordecai, and he told Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. Yeah, it's good. Now, when the plot was investigated and found to be so, they were both hanged on the gallows, and it was written in the book of the Chronicles of the King's Presence. Chapter 3. See, it's just good news. Well, after these events, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman. Yeah, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite. The Agagite. Okay, P.S. Do you remember the name Agag when we were looking, Agag, when we were reading through with David and stuff like that? It turns out that when the nation of Israel came out of captivity in Egypt and they made their way up through the Sinai and across and into the promised land and 40 years in the desert and all that kind of stuff, there were these guys who lived in the southern regions down there, the Amalekites. And the Amalekites were nasty because they were always nipping at the tails of the Israelites as they did this movement from Egypt into the promised land. The Amalekites were nasty. They were opportunistic. David dealt with them. They were horrible guys. Well, the ceremonial name for the king of the Amalekites, like Caesar's the ceremonial name for Roman kings, Agag is the ceremonial name for the king of the Amalekites. So what he's saying right here is that this guy is related to the royal blood of the Amalekites who had sworn an oath throughout their entire lives to be after the Israelites. Hated them. Lifetime, eternal enemies. So when a Jew reads that Haman is an Agagite, that's what they're listening to. Long-time enemies. Okay, so King Ahasuerus has promoted Haman. Oh, I can't believe it. The son of Hammedatha, the Agagite. That's how Jews would, the Agagite. And advanced him and established his authority over all the princes who were with him. What? And all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down, paid homage to Haman. For so the king had commanded concerning him. But Mordecai, remember who hung out by the gate? But Mordecai neither bowed down nor paid homage. No. And then the king's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, why are you transgressing the king's command? Huh? Now, it was when they had spoken daily to him that he would not listen to them. And they told Haman. And they told him to see whether Mordecai's reason should stand. That was weak too. But anyway, because they had told him that he, Mordecai, was a Jew. They told him he was a Jew. Oh, why would that make any difference? He's an Agagite. They hate the Jews. So when Haman saw that Mordecai neither bowed down nor paid homage to him, Haman was filled with rage. Ah! That's the closest I can do to rage. I don't. Yeah, okay. I'm sorry I scared some of you. Okay. Yeah. But he disdained from laying hands on Mordecai alone. For they had told him who the people of Mordecai were, the Jews. Therefore, Haman sought to destroy the Jews that much more. The people of Mordecai, who came throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. Now, in the first month, which is the month Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, Pur, that's where you get Purim from. Pur, that is the lot. Pur in Persian means lots. To kind of, it's like a lottery. Was cast before Haman from day to day and from month to month until the 12th month of the same month of Adar. And then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, he said, there is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom, and their laws are different from our laws and from all the other people, and they don't observe the king's laws. So it's not in the king's interest to let them remain. You know what I mean? If it's pleasing to the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who carry on the king's business to put into the king's treasuries. Let me translate for you. Let me kill the Jews, and I'll put silver into the king's treasury. How? Plunder, taking their money, okay? Now, the king took his signet ring from his hand, gave it to Haman. Remember, signet ring is how you make everything official and legal. Gave it to this man, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. And then the king said to Haman, the silver is yours and the people also, to do with them as you please. Death to the Jews. Now the king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and it was written just as Haman had commanded to the king's satraps, to the governors who were over all the provinces, to the princes of all the people, each province according to its script, each people according to its language, being written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's signet ring. Law. Letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all the Jews, both young and old, women and children, in one day, on one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to seize their possessions as plunder. A copy of this edict to be issued as law in every province was published to all the peoples so that they should be ready for this one day to kill the Jews. The couriers went out, impelled by the king's command, while the decree was issued at the citadel in Susa, and while the king and Haman sat down to drink, the city of Susa was in confusion. Chapter 4. Now, when Mordecai learned all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the midst of the city and wailed loudly and bitterly. He went as far as the king's gate, for no one was to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. And in each and every province where the command and the decree of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting and weeping and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes. Then Esther's maidens and her eunuchs came and told her, and the queen writhed in great anguish. And she sent garments to clothe Mordecai, that he might remove his sackcloth from him, but he did not accept these clothes. Then Esther summoned Hathach from the king's eunuchs, whom the king had appointed to attend to her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai and to learn what this was and why this was. So Hathach went out to Mordecai, to the city square in front of the king's gate, and Mordecai told him all that had happened to him, everything, and the exact amount of money that Haman had promised to pay into the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him a copy of the text of the edict, which had been issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show Esther and inform her and to order her to go into the king to implore his favor and to plead with him for her people, the Jews. Hathach came back and related Mordecai's words to Esther.
We missed him.
And then Esther spoke to Hathach again and ordered him to reply to Mordecai. Say this: all the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces know that for any man or woman who comes to the king to the inner court and is not summoned, he has but one law, that he be put to death, unless the king holds out to him the golden scepter so that he might live. And I have not been summoned to come to the king for these 30 days. So they related Esther's words to Mordecai. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, saying this: do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house, you'll perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this. Then Esther told him to reply to Mordecai. And she said this: go assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. And I and my maidens also will fast in the same way. And thus I will go into the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went away and did just as Esther had commanded him. Chapter 5. So it came about on the third day that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace in front of the king's rooms. And the king was sitting on his royal throne in the throne room opposite the entrance of the palace. And when the king saw Esther, the queen, standing in the court, she obtained favor in his sight. And the king extended to Esther the golden scepter which was in his hand. So Esther came near and touched the top of the scepter. And then the king said to her, "What is troubling you, Queen Esther? And what is your request? Even to half of the kingdom it shall be given to you." And Esther said, if it pleases the king, may the king and Haman come this day to a banquet that I prepared for him. So come to a banquet I'm going to prepare for you and Haman. So then the king said, "Bring Haman quickly." Yeah. "So that we may do as Esther desires, this banquet for us." So the king and Haman, they came to the banquet which Esther had prepared. And as they drank their wine at the banquet, the king said to Esther, "What is your petition? For it shall be granted to you. What is your request? Even to half the kingdom it shall be done." So Esther replied, "My petition and my request is, if I found favor in your sight, O king, if it pleases the king to grant my petition and do what I request, may the king and Haman come to a banquet I'll prepare tomorrow night." Would you do that? "Come to a banquet that I'll prepare for them, and tomorrow I will do as the king says." So Haman went out. He went out from the banquet that day glad and pleased of heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, and that he did not stand up or tremble before him, Haman was filled with anger against Mordecai. Now Haman controlled himself. He controlled himself, however, went to his house, sent for his friends and his wife Zeresh, and then he recounted to them the glory of his riches, the number of his sons, and in every instance where the king had magnified him, and how he had promoted him above all the princes and servants of the king. And Haman also said, even Esther the queen, let no one but me come with the queen, with the king, to the banquet which she had prepared. And tomorrow also I am invited to be with her and the king. But he went on, "Yet all this does not satisfy me. Every time I see Mordecai, that Jew, sitting at the king's gate." So Zeresh, his wife, said this, and all of his friends with him, "Have a gallows built, 50 cubits high." By the way, that's 75 feet. "Have a gallows built, and in the morning ask the king to have Mordecai hanged." Exactly. Yeah. Oh, that's bad. And ask that this guy be hanged on it. And then go joyfully with the king to the banquet of Esther. Come on, it's easy. I added that, okay? And the advice pleased Haman. So he had a gallows built. Chapter 6. Yeehaw. Now, interestingly enough, during that night, the king could not sleep, so he gave an order to bring the book of records and chronicles, and they were read before the king. Nothing else could put you to sleep faster. I added that. Okay, and it was found, interestingly enough, as they read, it was found written that Mordecai had reported concerning Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who were the doorkeepers, remember them, and that they had sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And the king said, wait. What honor of dignity has been bestowed on Mordecai for this? And then the king's servants who attended him said, Nothing has been done for him. So the king said, well, who is in the court right now? Now, Haman had just entered the outer court of the king's palace in order to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows which he had prepared for him in his backyard. Well, the backyard's not there, but it's close, okay? And the king's servant said to him, well, look, behold, Haman is standing in the court. Boo! And the king said, well, let him come in. So he came in, and the king said to him, tell you what is to be done for the man whom the king desires to honor? To honor somebody. What do we do around here? And Haman said to himself, whom would the king desire to honor more than me? Yeah, boo. So Haman said to the king, well, for the man whom the king desires to honor, let them bring a royal robe which the king has worn, and the horse on which the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal crown has been placed. And let the robe and the horse be handed over to the one of the king's most noble princes, and let them array the man whom the king desires to honor, and lead him on horseback through the whole city square, and proclaim before him, thus it shall be done to the man whom the king desires to honor. Then the king said to Haman, good idea. Well, I added that. Take quickly the robes and the horse, as you have said, and do so for Mordecai. Do this for Mordecai and lead him on horseback through the city square and proclaim before him, thus it shall be done to the man whom the king desires to honor. There we go. Plot twists, plot twists. Well, Mordecai, he returned that morning to the king's gate. But Haman hurried home mourning with his head covered. And Haman recounted to Zeresh, his wife, and all his friends everything that had happened to him. And then his wise men and Zeresh, his wife, said to him, listen, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish origin, you will not overcome him, but you will surely fall before him. And while they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hastily brought Haman to the banquet which Queen Esther had arranged. Chapter 7. Now the king and Haman, they came to drink wine with Esther the queen. And the king said to Esther on the second day, also as they drank their wine at the banquet, what is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to half of the kingdom, it shall be done for you. Then Queen Esther replied, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given to me as my petition, and my people as my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, to be annihilated. Now, if we had only been sold as slaves, let's say, men and women, I would have remained silent, for the trouble would not be commensurate with the annoyance to the king. And then King Ahasuerus asked Queen Esther, who is he and where is he who would presume to do this? And Esther said, a foe and an enemy is this wicked Haman. Then Haman became terrified before the king and the queen. The king, right on, I know. Yes, I've been waiting for this. Oh, sorry, I keep going. Great. So the king arose in his anger from drinking wine and just went into the palace garden. But Haman, he stayed like a weasel. I added that. He stayed to beg for his life from Queen Esther, for he saw that harm had been determined against him by the king. Now, when the king returned from the garden, from the palace garden, into the place where they were drinking wine, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was. And the king said, "Will he even assault the queen with me in the house?" Whoa. And the word went out of the king's mouth. They covered Haman's face. You know, like when you hang someone, you put a bag over the head? They covered his face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs who were before the king, said, "Behold, indeed, there's a gallows standing at Haman's house. It's 75 feet tall," which Haman had made for Mordecai. The Mordecai who spoke good on behalf of the king. And the king said, "Hang him on it." So they hanged Haman on the gallows, which he had prepared for Mordecai, and the king's anger subsided. Chapter 8. Now on that day, King Ahasuerus gave the house of Haman, his entire household, the enemy of the Jews, that same guy, gave all of that to Queen Esther. Sweet. I like that. Yeah, that's good. And Mordecai, he came before the king, for Esther had disclosed what he was to her. And the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken away from Haman, thank goodness, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Then Esther spoke again to the king, fell at his feet, wept, and implored him to avert the evil scheme of Haman the Agagite and his plot which he had devised against the Jews. Because remember, everything might be good in Susa, but the proclamation went out to the provinces, they're still going to kill all the Jews on that day. Remember? From India to Ethiopia, all the Jews. So Esther comes into his presence again, and the king extended the golden scepter to Esther, saving her life from barging on in his important meetings. So Esther arose and stood before the king, and then she said, "If it pleases the king, and if I have found favor before him, and the matter seems proper to the king and is pleasing the sight, let it be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who are in all of the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the calamity which will befall my people? And how can I endure to see the destruction of all my kindred?" So King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and to Mordecai, the Jew, "Behold, I have given the house of Haman to Esther, and him they have hanged on the gallows." Yeah, you can cheer there. "Because he had stretched out his hands against the Jews." Now, you write to the Jews, this is the king still talking, you write to the Jews as you see fit, in the king's name, seal it with the king's signet ring. But a decree which is written in the name of the king and sealed with the king's signet ring can't be revoked. Catch this. It was already sent out with a signet ring thing on it. You can't revoke that. What do you write? So the king's scribes were called at that time, in the 3rd month, that is the month of Sivan, in the 23rd day, it's getting very close to D-Day, the death of the Jews, and it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded to the Jews, the satraps, the governors, and the princes of the provinces, which were extended from India to Ethiopia, the 127 provinces, to every province according to its writing, to every people according to their language, and as well to the Jews according to their writing and their language. And he wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus, and he sealed it with the king's signet ring and sent letters by couriers on horses, riding on steeds, sired in the royal stuttery. I don't know that. And in them, the king granted the Jews, here it is, the king granted the Jews who were in each and every city the right to assemble, and in every city the right to defend their lives, to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate the entire army of any people or province which might attack them, including children and women, and to plunder their spoil. And on one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, the 13th day of the 12th month, that is the month of Adar. So let me summarize for you. He wrote a paper that said you can defend yourselves and you can actually wipe out anyone who's out to get you. And King Ahasuerus, by his authority, will not come and stop you. If you want to defend yourself, do it. It's declaring war. It's declaring civil war inside the country. So, a copy of this edict is issued as law in each and every province, was published to all the people so that the Jews would be ready for that one day to avenge themselves on their enemies. The couriers hastened and, impelled by the king's command, went out, riding on the royal steeds, and the decree was given out from the citadel at Susa. Then Mordecai, he went out from the presence of the king in royal robes of blue and white, with a large crown of gold and the garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Susa shouted and rejoiced. For the Jews there was light and gladness and joy and honor. And in each and every province and in each and every city, wherever the king's commandment and his decree arrived, there was gladness and joy for the Jews, a feast and a holiday. And many among the peoples of the land became Jews, for the dread of the Jews had fallen on them. Chapter 9. Now in the 12th month, that is the month Adar, in the 13th day, when the king's command and edict were about to be executed, on the day when the enemies of the Jews hoped to gain the mastery over them, well, it was turned to the contrary, so that the Jews themselves gained the mastery over those who hated them. The Jews assembled in the cities throughout the provinces of King Ahasuerus to lay hands on those who sought their harm, and no one could stand before them, for the dread of them had fallen on all the peoples. Even all the princes of the provinces, the satraps, the governors, and those who were doing the king's business assisted the Jews, because the dread of Mordecai had fallen on them. Indeed, Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame spread throughout all the provinces. For the man Mordecai became greater and greater and greater. And thus the Jews struck all their enemies with the sword, killing and destroying, and they did what they pleased to those who hated them. And at the citadel in Susa, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. Whoa. And Parshandatha, Dalphon, here you go, Parshandatha, Dalphon, Aspatha, Paratha, Adalia, Aradatha, Parmashasta, Arsai, and Ardai, and Vaisatha, the 10 sons of Haman, the Jews' enemy. They did not lay their hands on any plunder at all. So on that day, the number of those who were killed at the citadel in Susa was reported to the king. The king said to Queen Esther, "The Jews have killed and destroyed 500 men and the 10 sons of Haman at the citadel in Susa. What then have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? Now what is your petition? It shall be granted to you. And what is your father's request? It shall also be done." So then Esther said, "If it pleases the king, let tomorrow be granted to the Jews who are in Susa to do according to the edict of today, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows." So the king commanded that it should be done so, and an edict was issued in Susa, and Haman's 10 sons were hanged. Yay. The Jews who were in Susa assembled also on the 14th day of the month Adar and killed 300 men in Susa, but they did not lay hands on any of their plunder. They didn't take their riches. Now the rest of the Jews who were in the king's provinces assembled to defend their lives and rid themselves of their enemies, and they killed 75,000 of those who hated them. But they did not lay their hands on the plunder. They did not take any of their riches. This was done on the 13th day of the month Adar. On the 14th day they rested and made a day of feasting and rejoicing. But the Jews who were in Susa assembled on the 13th and the 14th of the same month, and they rested on the 15th day and made it a day of feasting and rejoicing. There's a one-day difference between people in Susa and the outlying provinces. I'll tell you why in a second. And therefore the Jews of the rural areas who live in the rural towns make the 14th day of the month, Adar, a holiday for rejoicing and feasting and sending portions of food to one another. Then Mordecai, he recorded these events, and he sent letters to all the Jews who were in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, both near and far, obliging them to celebrate the 14th day of the month Adar and the 15th day of the same month annually, because on those days the Jews rid themselves of their enemies, and it was a month which was turned for them from sorrow into gladness, and from mourning into a holiday, that they should make them days of feasting and rejoicing, sending portions of food to one another and gifts to the poor. Thus the Jews undertook what they had started to do and what Mordecai had written to them. For Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the adversary of all the Jews, had schemed against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast pur, lots, which is the lot, to disturb them and to destroy them. But when it came to the king's attention, he commanded by letter that his wicked scheme, which he had devised against the Jews, should return to his own head, and that he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Therefore, they called these days Purim, after the name of Pur. And because of the instructions of this letter, both what they had seen in this regard and what had happened to them, the Jews established and made a custom for themselves and for their descendants and for all those who allied themselves with them, so that they would not fail to celebrate these 2 days according to their regulation and according to their appointed time annually. So these days were to be remembered and celebrated throughout every generation, every family, every province, every city. And these days of Purim were not to fail from among the Jews, and their memory ever to fade from their descendants. P.S. This weekend is the celebration of Purim, 2,500 years after it was proclaimed here. Verse 29, then Queen Esther, daughter of Abihail, with Mordecai the Jew, woohoo! They wrote with full authority to confirm this second letter about Purim. He sent letters to all the Jews, to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, namely words of peace, words of truth, to establish these days of Purim at their appointed times, just as Mordecai the Jew and Queen Esther had established for them, and just as they had established for themselves and for their descendants with instructions for their times of fasting and their lamentations. The command of Esther established these customs for Purim, and it's written in the book. Chapter 10. Now King Ahasuerus laid a tribute on the land and all the coastlands of the sea, and all the accomplishments of his authority and strength, and the full account of the greatness of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him. Which the king advanced him. Are they not written in the book of the Chronicles? Yeah. The Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia. For Mordecai the Jew was second only to King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and in favor with his many kinsmen, one who sought the good of his people, one who spoke for the welfare of his whole nation. The end. Now let me make a few points. Make a few points as we go on here. Mordecai says to Esther, and who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this. Some of the critics of the book of Esther say it should not be included in the Bible, and you know why? There's no mention of God. I didn't say his name once. There's no mention of God. And here's the nation of Israel that's in captivity in Persia because God let them go for a while because of their disobedience to him. And they're in captivity in this foreign land. In a sense, they should have been abandoned by God. And yet, God didn't abandon them. You notice that? And there were a few, Mordecai, Esther, and others, who realized that perhaps God has brought them to this place for this particular time, and he arranged this. But Esther had to step out in faith. Now, did she hear this word from Mordecai up here when she was winning the beauty pageant and became the queen? Where did she hear this? When things were looking pretty bad. When things were looking pretty bad. When things are critical. And what you have to remember is this right here. So it'll come up. As far as Esther and Mordecai knew, this line might have gone down for a long time. It might have cost Esther her life. Might have cost Mordecai his life. Definitely would have, in fact. They really don't know. What they did in the midst of this part of the curve when things were looking bad and looking even worse is they said, perhaps God has orchestrated this moment for us to be involved the way we're going to be involved. Perhaps we need to step in for the good of others. Perhaps, Esther, you need to cash in this incredible position you've got as the queen of King Ahasuerus. Maybe you need to cash that in, maybe even be killed, if that's what it's going to take to somehow save these people. And it was when things were looking their worst. See, we looked ahead. We knew the story was going to turn out fine. So if you were Esther, you could just march right in and say, I'll just go in there because I'll be just fine because I know how the story ends. But she didn't. It looked like that at the time. So here's really a lot of the challenge to us. How do you know that where you're sitting right now and where God has equipped you and empowered you with His Spirit, that He hasn't brought you to a moment for such as this? I mean, what is He? How do you know He hasn't put things together in your history and where you sit, that He says there's a critical juncture in the history of the people that I want to bless, and I need you to do something that might cost everything you are? Would you be willing to do that? Because that's what Esther did. It could very well be that God has put you and positioned you. And you don't want to be in a position where, like Queen Esther, you might step back instead of what she did and say, well, I've got this really great situation. Why would I ever risk this? I mean, I might lose everything I have. I've spent my whole life getting to this position. Esther could have said, I'm the most beautiful woman in all of this kingdom of Queen Ahasuerus. I'm the one. And while I'm young, I need to get this cemented in before I start building wrinkles on my face. You know, and she might have said, this is my time. I'm not going to waste this. Are you kidding? I'm the queen of the king of the earth. She could have said that. She had a lot more to lose than we do. But I guess the question that challenges me every time I read this is, perhaps God has fit you for such a time as this.